Hi, welcome to my presentation on what is your standing. I'm going to begin with the premise that we are all created by the Creator. And when we now dispel the myths of the lies that we've grown up with, it's going to take us to a new place. And so I'm excited to be bringing this. Apologize for my low-tech solution here. But we're going to begin by understanding that we want to draw a line between the truth and the lie. And in ancient times, often a group of people, congregation, would put a wall around their civilization. And this was to separate from the people inside versus the outside. So as I draw a line between truth and lie, I'm putting a loop here. And the idea is that I'm going to be moving you from the lie into the area between the lie and the truth in this, just like they had a wide area in those old ancient gates in the wall itself, so that you could move into the middle where you could do trade, barter with those that are inside the civilization without letting you inside the inner walls. But when we look back at some of the big civilizations, such as Rome, we realize that they needed the ability to separate or be able to imply the laws outside of the walls. And in this term, they came up with a law that would handle all that. And the law is mundus vult decepi. And that's the idea that we're going to put the entire world into a lie of the corporations. And so I'm going to put that here on my corporate veil that I'm wearing. And this law reads, the world wants to be deceived, so let it be deceived. So let's watch how we've all been subjected to this law. And I ask you, does that law come from the Creator in truth, or does it come from the liar? Okay. So the first thing I did is I asked the AI to draw a picture of a Roman credit card. And I was given this, okay? The black card, a credit card. And so a couple things about this. The AI made it black, and black stands for death. And that's true. We'll find out that having a name in all caps means that it is death or a slave, okay? So we're going to put this inside the corporation, and I'm going to free myself because I'm going to tell you, I'm going to take this thing off here. Because one of the things that we find in commerce as well is that truth is sovereign. And in order to have truth, you have to have full disclosure. So we'll leave this being the mundus decepi and leave this here. And the way I get out of this is by full disclosure. And another ancient law in Roman is that when we claim fraud, we can claim it all the way back to the beginning, ab initio, so to the beginning. Another maxim that we need to understand is that so a thing is done, so must it be undone. Now, maxims have things in law that are like gravity. They've been around forever. They're just common truths than natural law, or what we call common law. So we're going to be talking about how we get subjected to all of this Roman law as part of the lie. So let's begin with the fact that we're always having to make compromises. We're presented truth, and we also have lies, and somehow we have to live between them. And the Christian movement began with, of course, Jesus, or whoever you called the prophet that came to the land. And the Universal Christian Church is what the Catholic Church was called at the time. And so they had an agreement with the Romans, okay? And so they created a dual office. So we have the Pope of the Catholic Church, which becomes the Roman Catholic Church, and we have the office of the Roman Pontiff. So we've already made a distinction here between truth and lie, and we've moved out of the truth. And that's what we get, and that's where we get this mundus decepi, that we're going to be subjected to the lies. So around 1302, the Pope, and more specifically, the office of the Roman Pontiff, created a trust, a world trust, put the whole world into the trust, and said, well, Jesus isn't here to take care of things, so we're going to put things in one big trust. And this was called the Unam Sanctam. So everything around, I don't know if you can see this here, but I'm going to put the trust on top of all this. Okay, and everything's going to go into this trash bag. All right, the corporate veil. Okay, so in this, it was based upon the biblical law of kinds. And so I'm a man, and so I'm living. I'm created from the Creator. I live on the soil, and the soil is connected to the land. The soil is the only living jurisdiction to man. Okay, and if I'm 6 foot under, I'm not living anymore, right? So the land may be connected and touch other things, but the land is actually a dead jurisdiction as well. Only soil is living. By the same token, the air jurisdiction, that above us, is a dead jurisdiction. If I walk off of a cliff, I die. Okay, I no longer have standing. And that's a really important term when you get into courts, is because what do you have, what standing do you have? And think about it, it's actually my 2 feet. I have to have standing. And if I remain standing on the law, on the land and soil, then I keep myself in the living jurisdiction of the L. The air jurisdiction is a dead jurisdiction. If I walk off the cliff, I'm not a bird. I don't fly. I die. Similarly, in the water jurisdiction, I can't breathe water. So although I need all 3 jurisdictions to live and have general jurisdiction over all of these elements, I don't live in the water. And so that's where we get the acronym LAW. And it stands for LAW, Land, Air, and Water Jurisdictions. And so back to being inside the trash can, if we can prevent you from getting your unalienable rights under God, under our Creator, then we can subject you to dead jurisdictions. And one of the interesting things about being in a dead jurisdiction is that it never ends. And so if I want to steal your credit card or your name, then I can apply that and keep it for all of your future generations, as long as I've subjected you to the wrong law. So that's what our talk is here about today. So let's move forward. We found that in getting to this land, and when I'm talking about this land, I'm on Colorado, I'm on the county Fremont, and I'm standing on land because I took my corporate veil off. We'll talk about how to do that a little bit later. But the first that got here, our founders, they were based upon the Amoricans, which are the French, and those French never were defeated, right? And so when they had their last fight with the English, because those two were often at war, then the monarch in the feudal system granted the Belcher and other clans of these French Norman conquerors, they granted them sovereignty in their own right. And it basically said, you are king of your own castle. You are equal to the king and the pope and everybody else in terms of the caste system of Europe. And so some of those came over with the other pilgrims and the other settlers over onto this land. And so doing, they had a mixture of those that were still subject to the king because they borrowed money. And he wasn't king at that point. He's only king of the Commonwealth. He's getting his crown from the Pope. And so under the unanimous Declaration of Independence, those Amoricans claimed to be independent and fought a war. Well, in order to resolve the war, the peace treaty, we end up having the three peace treaties signed. You know about the definitive Treaty of Paris, but do you know about the Treaty of Versailles or the Treaty of Ghent? So we had to have treaties in all 3 jurisdictions, land, air, and water. And so that's important because it was really us against the Tories that were here at the time. So they were loyal to the British king or had borrowed money from them. And so they needed to have a way to be able to pay back the debt that they'd incurred because they lost the war. And so out of these peace treaties is the need to sign 3 constitutions, which are basically contracts. They're trust contracts and also providing essential government services. And if you look in the Treaty of Paris, you'll see 2 important things. One, it talks about the King of England being a prince. Why is he prince? Because he's number 2 to the Pope, right, in that jurisdiction. Also, you see that we are sovereign. And so you see that sovereignty being carried on from the Magna Carta and the Norman Conquest over into the United States. So I forgot to put out here, but I created these 3 bags. And inside of our amazing deception, we are going to put land, air, a bag of air, and water. So these are going to go inside. And so the first constitution that is created is the 1787 Constitution. And look at the spelling on this. It has the definitive "the" with a capital T. So it's the one and only. And notice that the united is lowercase because it is the United States. The states were the sovereign because those were the people formed together in separate countries. And the States of America becomes the business organization. And that gets started, and you're going to now see some of the name deceit that goes on, because a lot of the way this is accomplished is by creating similar names. So this is the only living, and this is our local people. So we're going to put that on the land. And then the next constitution that comes out, I'm going to put the L for the land, and notice that this is unincorporated. And this is running fine, except that when our locals start realizing how things are going to be run, it's actually the Pope and the King that conspire against one another. If you do a search for the secret Treaty of Verona in the 1800s, you'll see that they conspired against the Americans. They didn't like the fact that the Americans, all of them, each were equal to the Pope and the King in the feudal system. So in 1861, we're going to see that our land Congress adjourned sine die, and that means without a plan to return. Okay, so they didn't like what was going on. But if we look at this, this is like a landowner that hires a chef, a butler, and a gardener. Okay, and so if the chef goes out of business, then what's left? That doesn't mean that the gardener has the right to say what's going to be cooked for dinner. That responsibility goes back to the original landowner, the one that did the hiring in the first place. And so our issue is that there was really no one to speak out for the Americans at this point. So they are considered lost at sea, interregnum in the international and global communities. So that's a big issue. But before we move on, I'm going to put the other constitutions out here, because we also have a 1789 Constitution, and that's of the United States of America. And this is important because it uses the word of instead of the word for. And that, I got my water backwards here. In contract law, Roman law, UCC is Uniform Commercial Code. This means that without. So it's without the United States. Okay? And so that's a tricky bit of language, but that's part of the deception. So we have a territorial contractor, and the territorial contractor is to help pay back the war debt by the Tories. So this is the method we all agreed upon. And so we were giving authority, our Title IV flag, to the British King so that he could do our navies and he could establish forts out on the territories, and we could then take our American settlers out there and they would form states under the Northwest Ordinance, until they had enough population to do so. So I'm going to call this the W in our LAW, law, and this is the English king, and I'm going to call it Burger's King. And again, like the name deception, I'm calling it similar to a corporation that flips burgers that we already know about. Okay? And so again, the name deception here. So that's the water jurisdiction. And then we have the final constitution, which is the 1790 Constitution, and it's of the United States. And so note that of America is not on here, but it's very similarly named. And the Pope had colonies here, so part of the peace accord was to make sure that he got his cut of the pie. And so we give them the right to have a central place for everybody to meet in D.C. and give access to the postal service and the patents, and give that responsibility that they could charge us for those things. And that's the air jurisdiction. And that's where we get the A in law. So we have these three jurisdictions now. We'll talk about what happens with those a little bit later. Oh, and again, I'm going to call this pop-eyed, like the chicken fryer. And this is where we get the UCC code. Uniform Commercial Code is we're all being subjected to the Roman law. And remember, Roman law, this is all about the deception. Okay, so I want to now talk about how I get involved in all this. Because you saw me, I had the trash bag on it to begin with. And that's because the corporate veil was on top of me. I didn't have any standing on air, on land. I only had standing in air and water. And that's because of the name deception. Again, going back to Roman law, we have a thing called the Justinian deception. And if you look at that, you'll learn about dog Latin. And it's how we write our names. So my name given by my parents is called my appellation. And it is first, middle, last. And notice here that I've put it in all lowercase because I'm free. I'm going to put that right here. Okay? So now I'm a man standing on land and soil, and I've got both my feet on the ground. I'm no longer standing on top of a corporate bubble. Now, the next name that I have is my name in what we call camel case, upper and lower case. And so this goes on the land, and this is a dead jurisdiction. So this is a dead corporate thing that gets attached to me. And I'm going to put that on the land. The next name I'm going to do is the air jurisdiction. And again, this is called the dog Latin. And so we've learned that in Roman law, if your name is in all capital letters, then that means you are a slave. Okay? And I'm a dead slave. So if I put that on the air jurisdiction. And so we've all seen these names before. My old driver's license, okay, your tax forms, your car registrations, your licenses, your application to vote. All of these things have all uppercase because that's under the municipal constitution, and it's all under the dog Latin, making you a victim of the deceit. Let me add one more name here, and that is my cursive name. And this is the curse of the sea is where we get cursive, because it looks like waves. And so I'm going to put that on the water jurisdiction, okay? Because my contracts are often signed from the water. And also, this is another little trick, is that L is not my name. So this is actually my twin brother who died at birth. And I'll talk about that in a moment as we get to birth certificates. Okay? So all this crazy stuff is part of the deception. The world wants to be deceived. Okay, so let's talk about how things get into this bag of tricks. There are 3 trusts that are created that you probably have no knowledge of, but it's based upon your names and your existence on this land. So because we have originally the land jurisdiction and the Spanish king that has the law of the Inquisition, we have estate trusts that are made once anyone is born on the land in one of the sovereign states. And so you don't realize this, but when you're born, instead of having a physician deliver you, put your name in the Bible, write it down, your appellation, and tell everybody in your congregation, rather than do that simple act, you are registered by a birth certificate. And if you go back and look at the law, the Townsend Act, then you go under the law of the sea, and you're actually made an officer in the British Merchant Marine. So I have a Citus Trust, and it becomes a foreign Citus Trust because it's in the water jurisdiction, and I am delivered by a doctor instead of a physician. So you hear the word doc in the word doctor, and a witness, the nurse. Now the problem is that they considered, back before we had a lot of knowledge of things, they considered that act of going down the birth canal as a water event, so they can apply water law. And because your name, so Michael L. McGowan, gets assigned to my twin who dies at birth, because they literally think that the afterbirth is kind of beating and ticking at the time. So they're going to use the trickery to have your twin get assigned all the wealth. So we're going to put the birth certificate here. I'm going to just fold this up. And this is my first birth certificate. And I'm going to stick this inside the deceit and put it into the water, because my parents didn't know better to reject this. They didn't object. And everything you've done, every time you sign your name, every time you agree to their contracts, you're agreeing to this deceit. Now, when I don't make claim on my estate, then I'm presumed lost at sea. So 7 years later, another birth certificate is created in the all caps name, and this one is in air jurisdiction, because in 1937, the Pope and the King merge, and they form the Declaration of Interdependency. So in this case, the butler and the chef have colluded with one another. And so this is why you have the IRS and the Internal Revenue Service. You're paying for both federal contractors. You didn't realize that they were 2 separate offices, and normally one officer does work in both offices, but they are different. So we're going to take this second birth certificate as part of the Cestacue Trust, and we are going to put it into the air jurisdiction. And now we're going to stick some other things inside here. Okay, so like my driver's license, that's all caps. I'm going to put that inside the air jurisdiction. And let's talk about money for just a moment. Okay, corporations don't own anything. They don't have any right to own land in the United States. All they can have is representations of physical things, because they're thoughts, they're fictions, they're dead. So when we talk about labor and money and trading things, then we have the real money. Okay, so this is a silver coin. So this has real value. So if I want to buy a cup of coffee from you or a burger, then I am going to give you physical money in silver, and you give me the good, and it's a done deal. It's a finished equation. But we'll soon find that all of the assets and everything, even the people, and that the term person, so legal person, is redefined by your water Congress, and they put everything in a trust, because we are at the Civil War, we're declared lost at sea, because remember, our land Congress went interregnum and adjourned sine die. So the real assets are put inside the claim, and the king comes on land, Burger King says, well, the Americans aren't here, so we need to do everything for them. So we're going to put all of this stuff inside of a trust. And because we're a corporation, we need to be able to represent a loan against those physical assets. So this is where we get money. And we're going to put the money inside the water here. Because that's just a representation. And this is actually a debt note. And it's not even a lawful instrument. It's a promise to pay back the value, because we're not exchanging real value. I give you money for a burger. You give me a burger because I'm a living man, even though I'm not claiming to be so anymore because of my contracts. I'm considered dead. But I am receiving the burger and I'm paying you in a debt. We're just trading debts. And so in the debt system, okay, and this is an accounting system. So we borrow a real silver dollar and we instead borrow it. So we put in a debt, and I'm putting a Roman picture on the money here. And the debt is a negative number. And so that balances out, because these are just representations, a zero accounting of the actual physical thing, then we have a positive. So a 1 and a -1, this will cancel out when they get together. So when your account with the IRS and your account with the Internal Revenue Service touch, then that zeroes out. Meanwhile, if you don't know about it, if you're inside the bag here, by your definition, then you are subject to the debt. You are under the 14th Amendment, which says you are a citizen of the U.S. and you are subject to that debt. But, Mr. Trump, where's the national credit? And here's the scary part. For every dollar that's ever been created in the debt, there's an equal and offsetting credit. So it's at least as big as, and this is crazy. So you walk into Burger King one day, you want a burger, and they say, well, I'm going to borrow the money so I can make you a burger, and I'm going to charge you interest. Does that make sense to you? No, that's part of the deceit. And to make it even worse, this has been going on for generations. And so when you claim, right, when you go back and say, I'm a living man, I'm outside all this mess. So when I go back and get my feet back on the land and the soil and have standing with the Pope, then I tell the Pope and the King that I'm equal to, all men are created equal. And so I say, okay, fraud goes back to ab initio. So every dollar for myself and every dollar for my parents and their parents back to 6 generations are owed me, right? Because when I paid for things. I paid for a burger at Burger King and I received the burger, but I paid with unlawful money. But I wasn't the one that had deceived. So every dollar that I've ever made in terms of wages by these corporations chartered by the King and the Pope are owed to me. So our claim to the Pope and the King now is we want every dollar back. And believe me, the storehouses have been overflowing for generations. The money's out there, the prepaid credit is out there. And if you take a moment to look at global528.com, you'll see how we are rebuilding the trade banking system. And when the final pieces are in place, we'll start getting victim compensation. And I'll just make this other final side note that you are owed millions. But because of the recent, the Pope has been forced by our claims to dissolve the municipal corporation by forced Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So the only contractor that'll be left is the territorial. And I show proof of this because when you see in the first term, Trump was a CEO of the corporation and also of both corporations, the municipal and the territorial, because of the collusion between the two contractors. But now that the municipal is in Chapter 7 and the territorial is in Chapter 11, bankruptcies, then you see when Trump goes out and and stands for the national anthem, you'll see that he's doing a salute as opposed to putting his hand over his heart as a civilian. So he's become an officer in the territorial because, remember, that's our military. And that's why we get the military as the UCMJ. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is our court systems. Either that or the UCC municipal courts. Okay, so we've put all these things in here. And what we realize at some point, and what we've been fighting for, is that we want to get out of this trash bag. We just want to stand back on the land and the soil. And the beautiful part about that is that the law is already there for us to do it. Because after we won the Revolutionary War, we had Englishmen look like your neighbor. We were both Englishmen or Europeans. So we all looked similar. So we had to have a way to say, okay, well, you might be a Tory and remain a Tory. You can stay on the land through the Residence Act, but I'm an American and I'm due land patents to stand on the land, and nobody can take the land from me because I'm equal under God to the other popes and the other kings. And I'm not a servant to any mortgage or deed or corporation. In fact, again, the trick was to get you under the air and water law so that they could create mortgages and deeds and real estate was the same thing as royal estate. Okay, so, because you don't have any access when you're inside this trash. Okay, so we have the 1779 Naturalization Act, and it basically gives us the ability to distinguish between Romans, Tories, and Americans. And so we basically put our name on this and we sign it with our thumbprint and in blood. We put our skin into the game to say, no, I claim to be an American. And everybody born on the land and soil in one of the several states gets to make that claim. And we have unalienable rights under our Creator. So this is an important document. And if you get a couple of witnesses to say this is your appellation, as opposed to those corporations and corporate what we call usufructs, created in dead things, created in the likeness of my name, which are part of this deceit. I'm not those things. I'm an American. I just have to claim it. And now that I claim it, oh my, then we go back and realize that, okay, so in this mess of all the trusts, because the Brits and the Romans have been going bankrupt and bankrupting all these corporations. So we have corporation after corporation, the UN, all kinds of things. And if you want a great history, take a look at Anna Maria Reisinger's Disclosure 101. She did a number of papers, and I think his name is Frank Robinson, compiled those and put those together. But she's gone to court and made all these claims for us. And then she put all the assets and rolled them into a trust on land jurisdiction that gives it all to those that return to the living land jurisdiction, soil and land. So that's an important thing. We can get back here. Because once you get back to the land and soil, you make objection to the fraud, then you have a very important legal precedent in their system. Remember, they're inside here. And this was actually on the land before the corporations came around around the Civil War time. And it's Cruden versus Neal. And on our land, the actual highest courts are our state courts. And this was by the Superior Court in South Carolina that basically says, if you are born on the land and soil and you haven't contracted with anybody, then you owe nothing. You don't owe anybody anything. So you have to voluntarily contract with those that you would want to contract with. But this isn't cited anymore because everybody's inside here and we don't know how to get to our what we call straw man accounts. All these trusts and things and usufructs created in my name. Well, how do I get to them? I can't if I'm inside the trash. But once I have standing on the land and soil and I can tell the Pope and the King what to do with their fraud, then we can go back and realize that we can first start, so a thing is done, so must it be undone. And so I can go back to the heir jurisdiction and break open this trust because this is the way to be unlawful was to create an escape clause for those that are living. And the escape clause was made really for the military, but we can use it because we return back to the land and soil. And so I claim my reversionary trust interest so that I can get to the things inside this trust. And what's inside that trust? Well, because America, United States, the corporation, went bankrupt back in the day, and these two, the Pope and the King, conspired with one another. Then you have trust inside a trust, and they create all these different layers. It's all inside here, and this work has already been done for us. But realize that some of the biggest things that we can get are back into the water. But as I told you, this was in your name. This is the afterbirth. So this was your sibling, your twin that died at birth, and so it's not even the right name. And so the only way I can get the Cestui trust back to the foreign civis trust and the infant descendant to make a probate claim is that if I first establish myself on the land and soil so that I can be an American that owned all this. And now I'm the donor. Okay, so that gives me a different, much more powerful than the patriot groups and people that have brought out pieces of this fraud for the last few decades. So we went all here to go one step further, and that is, well, what do we do with all this? So you've given me a lot of information that I can think about, but I'll let others work on it. And when do I have to make a decision? Or we realize that when you stand between the truth and the lie, you can't go back. You're now inside the loop. If you go back to the lie, you're committing genocide. You're part of the problem. But I'm in this loop. How do I get to the truth side? Well, I want you to be ready to be there. Okay? Even when we look at David versus Goliath, we realize that he picked up a handful of stones to throw. So he didn't realize that he was going to kill the beast with the first stone. And he'd also killed a lion and a bear before. So he was good at it. So when you stick your head above the foxhole, you have to have on your full armor of God or your Creator. So I want to talk to you because we want to start cleaning our churches, and we start by making sanctuaries. And so this is our website, and it's passover2.com, which really takes you to passover2.org. And so this is the ability to go in and present affidavits, or on the land, it's a statement in the form of an affidavit. And so what this says is, like in Acts 7, chapter 7, where Stephen puts his skin in the game, and you'll find this in maxims of law in commerce. So there's 10 maxims in commerce, and you should do a Google search on that, because you realize, like the law of gravity, that these are the very basics and elements that are critical to our functioning, but we don't know anything about it. So when we realize, okay, an affidavit or statement in the form of an affidavit, it just lists facts. And it says, I'm willing to put my skin in the game. I'm willing to autograph my name, and notice that I use red. So I'm signing in blood in land jurisdiction, and I put in the all lowercase and didn't use cursive because I wanted to make it apparent to all of you watching. So, and then I put my right thumbprint over the last of my name to say I'm signing this in blood, and it's under the penalty of perjury. So I've put my skin in the game. And so if I present this to you, now you have a responsibility to answer this. So in the laws of commerce, the maxims, there's only a couple things that can happen. One, you can accept it and live by it. And now this is my law. Okay. The second thing you can do is say, okay, well, I'm going to rebut this. And the only way you can rebut it is if you have equal standing. So you've got to be able to sign under penalty of perjury and be in the same jurisdiction as I am. So if you get to that, then you have to address every single fact line by line, or they remain in law as true. And then it is also witnessed. And so you can just have 2 or 3 witnesses. Again, that's a biblical process. Or you can go to a notary. And I just put here the difference in notaries. So we're the de jure, the living versus the de facto, the corporation. And so we would be Colorado State, Fremont County, and it would be a public notary, putting the public first. On their side, it would be the state of Colorado, meaning without the state. So you're not on the land, you're on a bubble on top of the land, a corporate bubble. And this is defined in the Uniform Code of UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. Similarly, it would be County of Fremont, and it would be a notary public. So those are the little nuances. But if you receive this, it's under penalty of perjury. It's on the record. And so if you are presented with a affidavit, then you either respond or you don't respond. And if you don't have the standing to respond, the same thing applies. And that's acquiescence. And that's just like leaving the battlefield. You've surrendered. You said, I agree to your law. And so that's going to be a big issue moving forward. You don't have to move outside of this bubble until you're presented this. But if you are, and if I've come to your congregation and presented an affidavit, then you are under the obligation to respond and fight. Okay? So you may have to go to your pastor, your leader, the fiduciary of the organization, and say, this is the truth. So you might have to stand up and dissolve your corporation, because no corporation has the right to own land or to subject you to any of this trash. And so, where are you today? I've given you a lot to think about. So you've now moved from the lie into the inner gate between truth and lie, and we're headed towards our Creator. Because if you think about this, the claims have been made. There's enormous amount of assets and wealth that have been stolen from us, because the Pope and the King realized, hey, if we subject them, if we usurp our law on top of their land law, we can steal everything. We can take their assets and leave them with paper. What good is paper? I can burn it, I guess. And so, you'll see the flag in the background here. How come I was never taught about this in school? Okay, this American civil flag, as opposed to the Title IV Betsy Ross war flag that was assigned to the delegated authority of our foreign for-profit contractors. And notice the way the stripes go. So this is easy to see at sea especially. So when the stripes go like this, the country is open. When the stripes are like this, the country is at war. And that's the difference. But how come you were never taught this? How come this was never displayed or isn't being displayed in our buildings? Because we're always at war. That's how they can use the laws of the water and the air and usurp our land government. Because if we figure this out and tell two friends, and they tell two friends, in 30 days, the entire world starts to know. And in 60 days, it's complete. So here's where you are. You've got your corporate veil on, and the puppet strings are being run by somebody else. But today, I've given you eyes to see and ears to hear. So it's now your responsibility in order to get to the truth. And I encourage you to do so, because we are forming a chain of truth. I've put my skin in the game. I've created an affidavit and put it on this site so that I can start challenging churches to go back and remove those unclean things that gets away from the creation and the truth. And so I'm going to put my hand on the truth, and I'm going to reach out to you and to my wife that's holding my phone recording all this, and we are going to join hands and form a chain of truth, just like a chain of title in the system that doesn't work anymore. We're going to get to the banking and get to all the promises of our unalienable rights under our Creator. And I thank you for your time in listening to this. Be blessed.